Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. But this isn't going to be a football show today. We are going to exclusively talk baseball with Steven Travers. This is Take 5 with Steven Travers. And I am honored in so many different ways to get to talk about some of these great icons and legends in the baseball community. There's so many of them. And occasionally I'll learn something or be reintroduced to a thought that I hadn't been thinking for decades, or an idea, concept, a piece of history that is brand new. And I'm certainly going to get a full experience today with this. The author of 2 books regarding Tom Seaver, one of them about the Miracle Mets in 1969, the other about Tom himself. And Steven, you've had a chance on numerous occasions to get a chance to visit with, meet, interview, but you're not really befriend yet. You're just, a little separation there. But our topic today in Tom Seaver is certainly one of the most unique in all of baseball history.
No question about it, Harper. Thank you very much. And Seaver plays an enormous role in my life from my earliest time. From the time he broke into baseball, and then when I discovered that he was a USC Trojan. And as a young baseball player growing up, I patterned myself off of Seaver. I was a drop and drive pitcher like Seaver. I did everything like him. I learned how he trained, what he did in the off season, his preparation before games, and I copied all of that. I mimicked Seaver in every way, and I admired Seaver not just for the great pitcher he was, but for his intellect. And I think also I would actually go so far as to say his moral qualities. He was very well known as a very good husband and father. He was a very smart guy. He was very well read. I think I wrote in one of my books that he was like a U.S. senator with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. He was a very unique person in the baseball world, and for all of his intelligence and his intellect, he was a man's man. He chewed tobacco. He played cards with the guys in the clubhouse. He drank beer. He was always a team leader. He was always someone that was admired by his teammates, particularly younger pitchers would come up, whether it be John Matlack or later Tom Hume or any number of these pitchers, I think Richard Dotson, and Seaver would take them under his wing.
Hey, Steven, real quick, that's an interesting concept that you bring up there. There's a standard bearer, the bell cow, so to speak, the guy that does things and gets the better results, but he's also one of the guys. He's not a separatist. There's some guys, and we've talked about Barry Bonds. Everyone knows that Barry on the field is just, he does it better than everybody else, but off the field, he really didn't have the same type of cooperation with the other guys. He wouldn't be a guy that would play a practical joke or slap you on the back and, just say, hey, happy anniversary or anything like that. Tom seemed to be someone that was still a full and ultimate teammate as well. Is there some
Seaver's practical jokes were legendary. So were Greg Maddox's. Maddox was a little bit more kind of
dirtier. He was a dirtier practical joker guy.
Okay, I'll give you one example of a Tom Seaver practical joke, and this says a lot about Seaver. Seaver was good friends with the opera singer Placido Domingo. That says a lot about Tom Seaver.
Yeah, right.
His friends. He loved the opera. He was. I mean, the guy who chewed tobacco and was a baseball jock, but he went to the opera and he was
wearing a tux, right? And tails. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
He was both. He lived in both these worlds. So anyway, he becomes friends with Placido Domingo. He's playing in Chicago. He's at the old White Sox, Comiskey Park. Domingo is in town, and Seaver invites him to the stadium and says, "Come on down to the clubhouse, and I'll introduce you to these players." So it's a huge moment for Domingo. Meet these Major League Baseball players, Carlton Fisk and whatnot. So he gets down there. This is several hours before the game, and Tom says to him, "Hey, Placido, we have a a tradition here in American baseball. Oh, what is that, Tom? Well, when you come to visit the ballpark, you get to wear the mascot uniform of the team. Oh, well, what is this? Well, it turns out that they had a mascot, which was a huge white sock, right? This guy came, he was hired. That was his job. He'd wear this white sock, and he would, kids would come by and he'd high five them. He gets Domingo to put on this white sock and walk around the stadium, and everyone in on the joke. And here's this fabulous opera singer, this intellect, wearing this white sock. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Harper. That's beautiful. Well,
that's Logan.
As you can imagine, eventually this guy who's in the sock, who's hired to be the sock, shows up and finds out that his sock is not in his clubhouse cubicle. And he goes out to the field and he sees an imposter, and he can't tell that it's Placido Domingo because you can't see his face. I don't know. I don't think you could see his face. Maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, he doesn't know Placido Domingo. He only knows it's a guy, an imposter, stealing his sock, and he calls security. And security goes, they arrest Placido Domingo on the field. And Seaver has to come to his rescue and explain to him. And I think it was all taken with,
+92325.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
This is world-class, renowned operatic, an icon of himself, and he's wearing the doggone dirty sock. And the regular guy goes, "Hey, who's this jabron in my sock?" Oh my gosh.
That's those are typical. Seaver's jokes were done with wit and humor. They were not just, Greg Maddox's jokes.
A fart joke. That's okay.
These were jokes that you'd play to get into a guy's head and, really have some lasting impact. And people were so Seaver had a sense of humor. He was a great teammate. And the one thing about his being his teammate is you better work hard.
Yeah.
You better work hard. You better be ready to go, and you better give 100% when you're playing behind him, because he's going to point it out. He had the imprimatur on every team he was on that if you were loafing it a little bit, he was going to let you know. And he was doing that from his rookie year on, because he was the best player in the history of the Mets as soon as he joined the Mets, and he knew it. And his teammates, even if they were 35 years old, knew that this 21, 22-year-old kid was the leader, and he didn't make any bones about it. He said, "No, we're not gonna be a loser. We're gonna be a champion." And he forged that team to victory.
I'm going to call it a character trait. And when do you think that? You've written 2 books that include Tom, right? One exclusively about him, and then another one where he was a grand portion of what happened in the Miracle Mets, the '69 team. And when do you think that character started to develop in him to where he goes, you know what? It's hard for me to put this in words, Stevens. He knew he was.
I know exactly what you mean.
He knew that he had something, and he wanted to bring all of that best out of whatever his first baseman, his third baseman, his center fielder, everybody else on the field. I want you to play your best, because now we're out here to win.
Yeah, it came from his background right off the bat. His mother was a great mother who told him you can do anything. His father was a corporate executive and one of the finest golfers in the United States in the 1930s. He was a leader. He had 3 siblings, all of whom were outstanding students and outstanding athletes, and all were older. And so he had to fight to compete with them and to try to be like them and to emulate them
and to succeed.
He played on the best high school program in America, the best college program in America, the best collegiate team in the summer in the United States. And then he becomes a New York Met. And his manager eventually is Gil Hodges, who was a tremendous leader.
Yep.
and he was in the United States Marine Corps, so that will teach you to become a man. And these are the factors that, and it's just his innate intelligence and work ethic, and he was an underdog, which is a story I'll tell about how he came. I think a miracle. His story. There are many stories of underdogs. There are many stories of late bloomers. His is almost miraculous.
Is it fair to say also that he's kind of dirt free? He didn't have this big scandal, or he didn't have, kids on the side, and you know what I mean? It's just he did it the right way, and everything seemed to be a result of hard work and success, and willing his way to do a little bit extra to be to the top. Is there some truth in that as well?
100%. And our guest last week, Pat Jordan, when he introduced Seaver to Sports Illustrated and said, I want to do an article about Seaver, Ray Cave, the editor, said, Seaver's boring.
Wow.
Because exactly what you said, he's never been arrested in a bar. He's never been cheated on his wife.
Right. Yeah.
He's just straight arrow. But he was and he wasn't, because, as I say, he once said, everyone says I'm the all-American boy, but I drink beer and I swear, he said, and he did. He still was a human being. And like I mentioned, a storyteller and a prankster. But as far as his career, his family, and there was times when he really protected his family even more than maybe he should have. It affected his relationship with the press, because he protected his wife so much because she was getting a lot of attention. We'll get into that.
Well, I would imagine, I'm going to use a biblical example. There are people that say, it's too hard for anybody to achieve what you're asking. But any dad would say, look at what this guy's been through. Yeah. Not perfect, but closest to the best example that you could think of the way to follow. Any of the biblical example, there's good and bad. You've got these leaders, and you've got kings, and you've got royalty, and you've got beggars, and all of them have flaws, showing that there's still a need for a savior. And I'm not trying to make this a religious show today. I'm just saying that, but there's a right way to do it. And it seems like the more that I did research on Tom Seaver, I'm thinking, this guy's as clean as a whistle. I mean, yeah, he drank a beer, but who cares, right? If that's going to be the separator for me.
Even better, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, but he had 311 wins. He had 200 losses. I mean, we could talk about every one of those losses in a show, and you see how he failed. But yeah, he also won 300. He's one of only a handful of people to ever win that many baseball games. And so you find that it's not boring at all. I'm sorry that the Sports Illustrated
there's nothing boring about him.
No.
I'll give you two examples. One, I wrote a book about the great Jim Murray of the LA Times, who I'm sure you grew up with, a fabulous sports columnist. So I read every single column Jim Murray ever wrote. And, I don't think he ever wrote a more laudatory column about anybody. I don't ever think he showed more admiration for any athlete. The only other athlete that I think compares in terms of what he wrote about him, in terms of Murray's love and admiration for the person was the great golfer Ben
Hogan.
Ben Hogan. Ben Hogan was Murray's first favorite back in the 40s.
Okay.
The articles that he wrote about Seaver were the most laudatory, and then the only real criticism that I received in my book, The Last Icon, was people writing, you just love him too much. You are too laudatory. You
painted. Yeah, you're
I wrote, there were some, look, there were a few factors. Some people called him money hungry. I think, considering the way sports is today, to say that he was money hungry then is a joke. But yeah, he wasn't money hungry. He but he knew his worth, and he knew how good he was, and he said, I'm as good as Steve Carlton.
Yeah.
I'm better than Jim Catfish Hunter, and so I should be paid as much as Jim Palmer or Carlton or Bob Gibson or any of these guys, because I am as good. In fact, I'm better than any of those guys. I just am. And he wasn't bragging, and so, but it wasn't being money hungry. He just knew his value.
In fairness, let's go back to, let's say, the late 60s and mid 70s, when free agency didn't exist, and then it was just starting. In fairness, let's look at both sides. The owners were starting to make a little bit more money. Instead of $1.50 for a ticket, they were charging $4 and $5. Right, so they were making more money, and yet their pockets were still real tight when it came to contracts. Explain to our viewers how they would always look at the degrading aspect of, well, you did lose 17 games last year, or your ERA was a little bit higher, or your strikeout to walk ratio, all the reasons that they would give for not wanting to give Tom Seaver a raise. There's some, I'm again, being fair, they have all of their reasons to say, no, we're not going to pay this guy. Explain it from that standpoint in your understanding of how baseball worked back in those days.
Well, if you're talking about the pre-free agency era, those arguments did not exist for Tom Seaver. Charlie Finley could say that Reggie Jackson struck out a lot, or, the Vita Blue lost some key playoff games. There was really nothing you could say about Tom Seaver. He was the best pitcher in baseball, bar none. He had led his team to the ultimate heights of greatness, above and beyond really almost anything anybody had ever seen. There was a period, it only lasted a couple of years, but there was a period in which I believe Tom Seaver was the most admired athlete in the history of athletes. I mean, you'd have to go to like Lou Gehrig, dying and saying he's the luckiest man on the face of the earth to find someone even comparable. But Seaver comes up with, there is no free agency, and then his career, and he's still in the prime of his career when free agency hits. And,
right.
And the way it worked out is he signed a new contract, and I believe 1976, and it was a good contract. It made him the highest paid pitcher in baseball, and everything's great, but almost immediately within weeks or a few months of signing this contract, everything changes, and you now have free agency, and suddenly Wayne Garland of the Cleveland Indians is being paid more than Tom Seaver. Right. And Jim Catfish Hunter is being made a millionaire. Jim Catfish Hunter was a fine pitcher, and I loved him, but he was not as good as Tom Seaver.
Right.
Although he pitched and beat Seaver in some key World Series games, at least one. That says a lot about how great Hunter was, because Seaver pitched well in those games.
Sure.
But now Seaver is looking at the new landscape of Reggie Jackson and free agency and what's going on. And he goes to the team and he says, I want to renegotiate my contract, in comparison with the new landscape of baseball. Suddenly, the general manager of the team literally calls him a communist for asking to do this.
Yeah, right.
They were neighbors in Greenwich, Connecticut, and Seaver is a member of the Greenwich Country Club. And this general manager, wasn't Bob Sheffing. It was, gosh, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name. It'll come to me. He was a real tool, and he calls him a communist. And he said, you should not be in the Greenwich Country Club. You should know your place. You're from Fresno, California. How dare you be in the Greenwich Country Club? His father, Seaver's father, was the best golfer in the United States in 1932, so he should be in any country club he wants to be, just on merit, on his skills alone.
Is it Don Grant? Who is it?
Yeah, M. Donald Grant. He was he was the architect of the end of the Mets, and then what this guy does, he has a writer with the New York Post,
Dick Young,
and Dick Young. His son-in-law worked for the team, and Dick Young literally was like, he was on on the take. It was like one of these old school bribes. He was on the take with the Mets to write whatever the Mets wanted him to. And they said, we want you to start writing bad things about Tom Seaver. Well, there wasn't much bad you could write about. But he writes that Tom Seaver's wife, Nancy, was jealous of Nolan Ryan's wife because Nolan had signed a contract for more money with the Angels. Just complete garbage, untrue. The Ryans and the Seavers were very good friends and former teammates. And that was the end of Seaver. Seaver knew exactly what was going on. He knew that Young had written it on Young's behest. And he goes, I want out. I can't be here. And a trade was forced to the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah.
And, and he was great for another 10 years. But
I think I was a sophomore in high school when I read about that. And one of the things that I look at before we go into his past and where it all began is Tom Seaver was the type of the guy, in my opinion, as a young baseball follower and a fan of the game, that you kind of admired how good he was, but you sure didn't want him to pitch well against your team. You know what I mean?
Well, that was always tough for me. I kind of rooted for the Mets and I rooted for Seaver, but in the 1973 World Series, he's up against my Oakland A's.
Yeah.
That was a tough one. And I went to 4 of those games at Oakland. And Catfish Hunter beat Seaver, and the A's did win the World Series. But I'll never forget Reggie Jackson. He had the best comment ever about Seaver. You're facing Seaver tomorrow, Reggie. What do you think? And he goes, Tom Seaver's the best in baseball. Blind people come to the park to hear him pitch.
Yeah. That's got to be in a Ron Luciano book somewhere, between him and Nolan Ryan. Well, here's my opinion. You had Felix Mian, Bud Harrelson, Cleon Jones, if I'm not mistaken, in center field. You had a very old Willie Mays and a very old Rusty Staub. It was an older, different team, not too old, but, against a very young, prime of their life A's team. Yeah. The Dodgers went against them the following year and had the same struggles. We can't hit against these guys and we can't keep them off the bases. It just what a juggernaut the A's were in the early 70s.
Well, they were as good a team as I've ever seen, and they were fundamentally as good as any team I've ever seen, ever. And I certainly followed them as closely as you possibly could. The 73 New York Mets is Tom Seaver. They called him the franchise. I mean, he had 2 nicknames. He was Tom Terrific, and he was the franchise. And he was. Yeah. He was the franchise. He carried that team on his back to the championship in the end of the season, beating the Cubs in the last game, beating the Reds in the playoffs, pitching against the A's in the World Series. It was, and there were other good players. Jerry Koosman had a very strong year. John Matlack had a very strong year. Those guys were they were acolytes of Tom Seaver. So,
hey, was Holtzman an A at that time? Because he had earlier been
he was a 20-game winner for the A's, and a couple games in that World Series. He was Kenny Holtzman was a true big game pitcher. Big games, playoffs, World Series down the stretch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that 73 Mets team couldn't hit. Their defense wasn't particularly great. Even the leadership of the team was a little off. Yogi Berra was the manager, and Berra certainly knew how good Seaver was, but the relationship Seaver had with Berra was different than the one he had. With Gil Hodges, it was really almost father son. They were both Marines, and it was magic. It was nothing less than magic.
Yeah. When did Stengel stop coaching the Mets?
I believe Stengel's last year was 1965.
Okay.
Then there were several other managers. Wes Westrom was the Mets' first manager, and then Gil Hodges was hired in '68, Seaver's second year.
Wow. Okay.
And it was a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Mets, completely different organization. Well, let's go back to the beginning then. Tom's born in California. You said the Fresno area is basically a mecca for young baseball, little league, high school ball, the amount of kids, the hard work that's done. And Tom was a part of that in the early part of his life.
Yeah, I think there was a sign entering town or in the town that says Fresno, California, baseball capital of the world. It was at that point. And so it was just in your DNA to grow up playing baseball in the dusty, hot sun of Fresno. And Seaver was an outstanding little league player. And but then when he's 13 years old, this is when it happens. You go to a diamond that's a major league diamond. It's not a little league diamond. And the older kids and the bigger kids are able to make the adjustment. Seaver was a runt. He didn't grow. So he gets to high school. His freshman year is at Fresno High School. The varsity team that year has been named by maxpreps.com, and I think also Student Sports Magazine did an analysis and determined the 1959 Fresno High School team, who were 35-0, to be the greatest high school team of all time. Jim Maloney, an all-star. Jim Maloney was an all-star with the Reds. He's on that team. Wade Blassingame was an all-star with the Reds. Dick Ellsworth was an all-star with the Cubs. Pat Corrales, I think he made an all-star team, was a catcher with the Braves. Dick Selma was an outstanding major leaguer and a teammate of Seaver's for a while. They're all in the program. Seaver's a freshman, and no one thinks anything of Seaver. Seaver's junior year, by this time, as you know, Harper, if you have any sort of talent in high school, you're certainly going to make the varsity by your junior year. He's still on the junior varsity.
Is he really? Wow.
Does not make the varsity until his senior year. He's 5'6". He weighs about 140 pounds. He doesn't have any strength. The only thing he has is he's got some muscle in his legs. Goes out for the basketball team. He can't play basketball worth beans, but his competitive nature is so tremendous that he won't let anyone score on him, and he'll dribble the ball using his hips to get under the basket until he's right under the basket and he can score, and he actually makes all-city in basketball. He finally gets a chance to play on the varsity as a senior. And his record is 6 wins and 5 losses, and he's throwing a knuckleball. He can't break a pane of glass, and he makes all city on a team that plays in the Southern California. I think it's the Southern Section playoffs, but nobody is looking at him. No scouts are paying any attention to him, and there's plenty of scouts who've signed his teammates and friends over the previous years.
Right.
His brothers and sisters, you see, I had a sister who was a swimmer at UCLA, great athlete, great student. His older brother, a swimmer at the University of California, great student. Another sister gone to Stanford. His father had been a Walker Cup golf champion at Stanford in 1932. So athletics was in the family, and all of his older siblings were great. And here he's nothing. And his father was a corporate executive. He had the money for him to pay for college, but he goes, you paid for all my siblings to go to these top schools. I don't want you to have to pay for me to go. I want to go to USC and be a dentist, and not to play baseball, but to be in their dental program. And he goes, I'm going to join the Marine Corps. And they have a program where if you spend a year in the Marine Corps and then you go into the reserves, you they'll put you on the GI Bill and it'll pay for college. So his idea is to go to USC. In the back of his mind, this fantasy, maybe I'll try out for the baseball team at USC, but he knows it. I'll never make that team, even as a walk-on. He goes into the Marine Corps. As I say, he's about 5'6", 140. Well, he's at Camp Pendleton in the Marines, and all you're doing all day long is push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, lifting weights, running, eating 3 squares a day. And he has this natural growth spurt. Within a year, he goes from about 5'6" to be about 5'11", 6 foot, pushing 6 foot, 190. And it's all muscle.
Yep.
And after the basic training portion, he's doing his AIT training, and he's able to play on the baseball team at Camp Pendleton. And he's throwing fat. He's throwing hard. He's throwing gas.
Yeah.
Going, holy cow.
Yeah.
So
I can't imagine how sore you would normally be from your training as a boot camp Marine anyways. And then you're going through a growth spurt where you're going to grow 4 to 5 inches in a summer. Are you kidding me? I can't. His ligaments.
He's young and strong. He's young and strong and enthusiastic, and he's loving it. And so now he thinks to himself, I could go to USC and they'll pay for it, and I can major in dentistry. But he's thinking, you know what? I'm going to give baseball a shot. And he goes to Fresno City College. He shows up in Fresno. Nobody's seen him for a year. He goes to the barbershop to get his hair cut. Hey, how you doing? Oh, yeah, take a seat. He goes, well, don't you recognize me? What do you mean? I'm Tom Seaver. Little Tom Seaver? No one recognizes him. He's grown so much. He's gotten so much taller and so much bigger. He has to buy all new clothes.
Yeah.
He shows up at Fresno City College, which is another top-level junior college baseball program then and now.
There were probably 3 scouts in the barbershop just getting their haircut too, right? There's just
this is baseball capital. Everybody plays baseball in Fresno. The American Legion, the high school, the junior college, and the Fresno State had made it to the College World Series in 1959. His high school team beat the 1959 Fresno State Bulldogs in a practice game.
Wow,
that's how good they were.
Yeah.
So he gets
on the bench. Tom Seaver on the bench, just soaking it all in, just absorbing all of this.
So he and the other thing is, he has, because he didn't have a fastball, he knows how to control it. He knows how to think. He's smart. He's already a straight A student. He's popular. He's popular with girls and all this. The only thing he doesn't have is hasn't really made it in baseball yet. So now it's Fresno City. Coach, I think his name was Coach Bartels, Art Bartels. And doesn't even recognize Seaver. He goes, okay, tryouts. And the JC team, they probably already know who their players are, but you have to have tryouts for obligatory walk-on players. So Seaver's there. What position do you play? And I don't even think Seaver even tells him his name. Okay, pitcher. I'm going to try out for pitcher. Gets out on the practice mound, throws a few warm-ups. Okay, let's see what you got. Popping the glove,
Yeah.
How hard is he throwing? It's got to be 90. What's your name? Oh, I'm Tom Seaver. Tom Seaver, knuckleball pitcher from Fresno.
There used to be a kid in the area, but you're not him.
That's me. Yeah. What happened? You were a runt. Well, then I went in the Marine Corps and I got bigger. You went in the Marine Corps, yeah, and now you're 6 foot 200 and you're throwing at least 90 miles an hour. Immediately is the ace of the Fresno City College baseball team. Has an outstanding year. He's 9-2, strikeout an inning. He's immediately he's all conference, immediately one of the best prospects in the state. And his dream is coming true. Rod Dado approaches him, says, I want to give you a scholarship to play for the USC Trojans. Doesn't have to go to USC on a GI Bill to be a dentistry student. Now Dado comes along. But then Dado says to him, Tom, there's one thing I want you to do. I want you to play in Alaska this summer because there's competition is really good. And I want you to prove that you've got what it takes to get a scholarship. So now this is a real challenge for Seaver.
Hold on real quick, Steven. Was that a condition? Or did he?
Yeah, I believe so.
Did he have the scholarship offered, or did he say go to Alaska and then we'll talk about it when you're done?
I'm not exactly sure. I think the scholarship was kind of rescinded. It was a little bit of a two-way play going on. I'm not sure if the full scholarship was offered and then rescinded, but at some point he says, I want to see how you can do in Alaska before I make this decision on you. So Seaver is really up against it because the Alaska Gold Panthers are the collegiate summer baseball team in America at this time. And the team is an all-American, all-star. It's not even a college team. It's an all-American team that has Rick Monday, Greg Nettles, Mike Paul, Ken Holtzman, just every position.
Alumni, the list goes on and on, right?
The list goes on and on. Seaver has to just fight his way to get pitching time on this team. But he pitches well, and he is proving himself. And towards the end of the season, Dado had a summer team that goes up to Alaska to play them, and Seaver pitches against them. And Seaver's mowing down these Trojan Summer League players. And at some point, the Alaska coach, who was the mayor of Fairbanks, Alaska, calls out to Dado, "What do you think, Rod?" And Dado goes, "I don't know. I haven't seen the ball yet," And he's calling Seaver the phenom from San Joaquin. Then even then they go to the National Baseball Congress, the NBC, which was it's basically the College World Series of summer baseball. And the manager of the team has to decide whether Seaver is going to even make the squad to go to Wichita. And it's between Seaver and Ken Holtzman. Ken Holtzman was a first-team All-American at the University of Illinois. Seaver is a Fresno City College pitcher.
He hasn't he hasn't played a Division I game yet.
Yes.
Wow.
But Seaver kind of proves, and his attitude is such, I'm going to go with Seaver. Beats out, and Ken Holtzman, a 20-game winner and all-star in the major leagues, does not make the Panthers roster for this trip. They go to Wichita. They're in Wichita, and they play a practice game, like an exhibition game, against a team called the Wichita Dreamliners, which was just to get ready before they go into playing the tournament. The Dreamliners have several ex-major leaguers on their team. They're a really good semi-pro baseball team. One of their players is Rod Cannell, who had been with the New York Mets just a couple of years earlier. And Seaver pitches the game, and they knock Seaver around. They beat him 6-3. And Seaver, after the game, some of the guys go into a bar and have a few beers, and Cannell and a couple of his major league teammates who played for the Dreamliners are in this bar, and they sit down and they're all having a few cold ones. And Cannell says, "Hey kid, you're going to be a major leaguer." And Seaver's going, "You knocked me out of the box in the fifth inning. You beat me 6-3. What are you talking about?" He goes, "Don't worry about that. You've got the stuff. Believe me, I played in the big leagues. You have what it takes. I mean, yeah, we got a few hits off you, but you've got what it takes." And so Seaver really is encouraged by that. He ends up in the NBC having a fantastic couple games, and even hits a grand slam homer to add to everything else, and makes the all-tournament team, which is known as the NBC All-American team. And of course, he gets the scholarship to USC, arrives at USC, and now he's got to, as he put it, he has to work to be a starter at USC. This is the best college baseball team in the country. Everywhere he goes, it's competition challenge. Manages to make their pitching rotation, pitches in a game against the USC alumni, gets Ron Fairley to hit a pop-up. Fairley, as he's running back to the dugout, goes, "You got great stuff. I'll see you at Dodger Stadium in a couple of years." So he's people are telling him, major leaguers are telling him, you're going to get there. Has a dynamite
seeds are being planted, and all the while I'm thinking, as you mentioned earlier, how cerebral he was. This is my plan. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to go through the GI Bill. Everything seems to be organized in a very specific way, and this is out of the normal organization, but in a way that's so advantageous for him in the way that his life turns out. I've got coaches, people fighting over me, and I'm getting on this roster and I'm pitching well enough. But even when I don't pitch well, people see something in me that he may not know is there yet. He's developed into it, but you know what? The pie is slowly being baked to the point where it's just about ready to take off, isn't it? Wow.
Well, Harper, you're an athlete, so you know what it's like when that moment comes where you look back and you say, all those two-a-days, all those sprints, all that time in the weight room, all that effort, all the mind games of the coaches, everything I did at Notre Dame High and Colorado State, and now I'm with the Philadelphia Eagles or the Atlanta Falcons or the Dallas Cowboys, and you're there. And this is validation of everything you've worked for your whole life. It does pay off. It really does. They told me the hard work would pay off, and it actually does. This is happening in Seaver's life.
Yeah.
Seaver is living. His roommate is Justin Dato, Coach Rod Dato's son. His best friend on the team is Mike Garrett, the Heisman Trophy winner, who's an outstanding baseball player. And Seaver already sees the value of weight training and conditioning through his Marine Corps experience. And baseball players really didn't lift weights, but Garrett did because he played football.
Right. Yeah.
And Seaver goes to Garrett. He says, do you think weight training would help me? And Garrett goes, there's no question it will.
Yeah.
He goes, really? They say it tightens guys up. Oh, that's a fallacy. Believe me. Play both sports. And
there are some pitchers even today, Steven, you know this. There's some pitchers I will never touch a weight, and they look like it. Where Tom embraced it, Nolan Ryan embraced it. Nolan and Tom both had from the waist down. They were two of the stronger players in the league.
Yeah, Seaver had wrestler's legs, and he recognized this aspect of his physique. He says, "I'm going to make the most of the biggest legs that I have, which your buttocks and the back of your legs, your hamstring and your legs. And I'm going to drop and drive and use my legs to propel my fastball at the fastest speed possible." Starts lifting weights with Garrett. And he also had a teammate who was a physiology major, and he worked with him. This is how smart he was. Worked with him on physiology and the muscles to pay attention to. Devises a particular weight training program for pitchers.
And then, please forgive me for interrupting. And then the kinesiology of the motion and the follow through and how I can get the most out of my shoulder and the rotation, and studying that in a way where I can get more strength, more speed, more accuracy without putting any extra pressure on my shoulder. How do you make that happen, right? And so he's figuring all of this out from a scientific standpoint, which makes him a better pitcher. Unbelievable. Yeah.
He's a student. He's an artist. He takes it seriously. Nothing's going to stop him. He's the ace of the Trojan staff. He's 10-2. He's one of the best college pitchers in the nation. He's on a team with Bill Spaceman Lee. And this is the first year of the draft. And the draft, no one really knows how to handle the draft. How much you're supposed to pay players in the draft. There's no real template. There aren't really any agents. The Dodgers draft Seaver. Thomas Sorda, was a scout, arrives at Seaver's house and offers him $2,000. Seaver says, "I want $50,000."
Yeah.
Sorda says, "Good luck with your dental career." Could have been a Dodger playing with Sandy. Oh
my gosh!
Imagine the Dodgers of the '70s with Seaver. I mean, they beat the Reds. They beat the A's. Anyway, goes back to Alaska, has another phenomenal summer pitching for the Gold Panthers. Now it's 1965-66. This is his junior year. It's actually would be his 62, 3, 4. It's really his fourth year after high school. He was a 17-year-old high school kid, young, but because he was in the
Marine Corps,
that year counts in terms of getting him eligible for the draft and to be signed. And he has an excellent fall, and he's considered at this point the best collegiate prospect in the nation. And there was in those days something known as the winter draft. It's a fall draft, and it's generally for junior college players. I think later some rules were changed because of what happened to Seaver, but Seaver gets drafted in this January draft. And he's drafted by the Milwaukee Braves, who are about to become the Atlanta Braves. And they offer him what he wants, which is $50,000. He signs the contract and he's ready to go to spring training. However, Dado is not very happy because he's lost his best pitcher. And Dado brings this up and says he's not eligible because we played the Camp Pendleton Marines in our first game of the season. So our season has officially started, which means he's not eligible. And the NCAA or the major leagues agree. No, the contract is void. Now, what Dado wants is for Seaver to come back to USC and be his ace. But the NCAA says, no, you signed a contract.
He's a pro. He's
kind of screwed over. So his dad calls the commissioner of baseball and explains the situation. And the commissioner says, okay, I'll put notice out to to every big league teams. Anyone who's willing to match the Braves offer of $50,000 can go into a lottery for Tom Seaver. Cleveland Indians, Philadelphia Phillies, New York Mets. First good lucky thing that ever happened to New York Mets. Their name is pulled out of this lottery. Tom Seaver signs with them, goes to spring training, and he's a hot shot. Everybody is going, oh, that's Seaver, the phenom from USC, and he's immediately, this is the guy only a few years earlier got no scholarship, nobody's looking at him. In a very short period of time, a miracle has occurred, and he's absolutely a top prospect.
Hey, Steven, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Please forgive me for doing this, but you mentioned something regarding the rules, I'm going to call it the differentiation between the Major League Baseball, the draft, and the NCAA and the rules there. There's an overlap, in my opinion, where Tom could technically say, and I'm going to use, he got screwed, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But that's the way the rules were in that day. And we look back at it and they go, how could that be? Vincent Turner and I had a discussion just yesterday about how one of our legends that we were talking about was drafted, and it was in December. And in order for him to be eligible to play in the January 1st bowl game, he would have been declared ineligible if he had signed well, he was drafted and they want to sign right there. So it's a catch-22 of a mess of the rules. And baseball had the same problem too, didn't it? Oops, we made a rule and it's so ridiculous that it ended up affecting one of these players. And now that we've, to coin the referee thing, after further review, at least it was favorable for Tom that they looked at it. Instead of him being ineligible for the draft, they had to figure out a way to do this. And so I guess that's a real lucky place for him to be, instead of him being ineligible and then undraftable because of the rules that were in place with the NCAA and Major League Baseball at that time.
Yeah. Well, the draft was brand new, so a lot of these rules were not, the powers that be didn't look at every angle.
Right. They didn't think it thoroughly
out. It's worth mentioning that the Dodgers, who had drafted him the previous spring, also wanted to enter that lottery. And Buzzy Bavasi was so busy dealing with the fact that Sandy Koufax and Dom Drysdale were holdouts during this time that he forgot to get the Dodgers name into that lottery. So this is the Dodgers. This is Seaver's natural team. Seaver had season tickets at Dodger Stadium. He had an uncle who had season tickets, and he would go to every Dodger game he could to see Koufax and Drysdale. This is his team. He grew up. He's from Fresno, but his dad would take them on vacations to Southern California, and they go to Dodger Stadium. Should be a Dodger, but now he's a Met. But this is New York, and so there are some advantages in this respect. Also, he has met a beautiful girl by the name of Nancy Lynn McIntyre. And you look at some early pictures of her, and she was a beautiful blonde California girl, went to a rival high school and went to Fresno City College, and he starts dating her. He's at USC, and he goes into the minors, and he's playing at Jacksonville. This is AAA. I mean, they don't put him in the rookie league or Class A. They're like immediately AAA. And he just loves this girl. And he says, I don't want to wait till the off season. I want you to come out here and marry me. And she flies out to Jacksonville and gets married at at the city hall. And this is Tom Seaver, because he, I don't know, this is what you call a career move, but the way he thinks, it's like, okay, I want my life to be exactly the way I want it to be. My baseball, my career, my education, my wife. I don't want to be a guy who's, seeing girls after the games. I want to get my rest. I marry this girl. I want children. I want a family, and I want to settle down. That's what happens. And it's a beautiful marriage. So Seaver makes the majors in 1967. He's one immediately, like I say. The guy has a 95 mile an hour fastball. This is a guy who grew up having to throw knuckleballs and curveballs and learning how to throw on the corners. He already has the mind and the study and the way to get hitters out when you don't have your best stuff. Now he has the best stuff. I mean, outside of maybe Bob Gibson and Juan Marichal, he's got as good a stuff as anybody in baseball. Makes the All-Star team, has a great season, is the Rookie of the Year, and he's a hero in New York. The Mets are becoming more popular than the Yankees, and he's just loved in New York.
The Yankees are on a decline now, right? From 67 until the mid 70s, they had a little dry spell. They didn't make the playoffs, and Baltimore is getting better, and the A's are getting better, and who else? Detroit is pretty good, right? There's a bunch of teams.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Landscape of baseball. The Mets are still not good. And
right.
Seaver doesn't like that. And Seaver, as I mentioned earlier, he's reading the riot act to anybody. He doesn't care if they're 35 years old. If he doesn't think they're giving it everything, he's saying, you can find another place to play. You're not going to play behind me. He's a leader. Forgive
me for interrupting one more time, please. At SC, how many years, and did they win any national championships while he was with them?
No, he was officially there only in 1965. He was on the fall ball team in the fall of 65.
Okay.
But signed prior to playing any games in the 66 season. They did not win the national title. It was in between national championships.
Okay.
They had good players. And Dato was a great coach, and Seaver just said he learned so much from Dato about preparation and having your mind right and assuming dominance on the mound.
Right. And being ready to go when the ball was put in your hand, right? Being ready. Yep. I'm with you.
In 68, Gil Hodges arrives. Seaver has a season if the team simply will not score runs for him. Seaver should win 25 games in 1968. His ERA is 2.19 or something crazy like that. throws a lot of complete games, makes the All-Star team again. And outside of Bob Gibson and Juan Marichal, probably the best pitcher in baseball. But the team, again, is not good. Now we get to 1969. Now it's divisional play. They have Jerry Koosman, they have Jerry Grody, and they have Cleon Jones. These are all all-star players. And some young players who are like coming along, like Gary Gentry. No one really expects much out of the Mets, but Seaver is talking about, we can finish second in our division. I don't think we're going to beat the St. Louis Cardinals, but I think we will be a contender, and we're going to build on the future. And the season starts, and the team falls behind, not the Cardinals, but the Cubs. And they get to June, and then they have a 11-game winning streak, and they get to the point where they're playing crucial games, and they're no longer 9 games back of the Cubs, and they are now only a few games back of the Cubs, and the Cubs are in town at Chase Stadium. The first game, the Mets rally in the 9th inning from a 3-1 deficit to win 4-3 behind Jerry Koosman. The next night, Tom Seaver's pitching at Shea against the Cubs. And this is the introduction of a superstar. This is the creation of a New York icon. Okay, this is entering the pantheon with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, Jackie Robinson, Willie Mays. This is the night. This is Broadway. This is the encore. It's 59,000 people at Chase Stadium.
Wow.
Not a seat to be had. It is the biggest thing in baseball. It's a midsummer classic. And Seaver up until this time is throwing about 95 miles an hour. And as I said, his life and his body is a miracle. He's still growing. He's still getting better. And at this point, he is literally improving and throwing harder every game. And he's going from throwing 95, now he's throwing 100 miles an hour. And he throws so hard that night, he throws a perfect game against the Chicago Cubs for 8 1/3 innings. One of the greatest performances of all time. Finally, in the 9th inning, a guy named Jimmy Qualls breaks up his perfect game. He ends up with a 1-hit shutout. And the Mets fans are going gaga over this guy. He's 14-3 at the All-Star break. He makes the All-Star team. The team does have a little bit of a downturn, and they again fall 9 games back.
Wow.
Now we get to the last 2 months of the season.
Hey, real quick, to interrupt again, I'm sorry I keep doing this. Chicago, is there any place on earth that craves for a consistent winner and doesn't get it than the Chicago Cub fan?
Yeah, this is when you think of the Cub curse or the history of the Cubs, no season, at least up until this point, stands out more in terms of their failure.
But they're built up for them, right? You mentioned the 59,000 at Shea Stadium. Well, how about what is the capacity at Wrigley? 35?
Selling out their games.
There's no empty seat in Chicago from July on, right?
This and baseball had been on a little bit of a downturn, and baseball is back, baby. And this is New York and Chicago. These are the 2 great American cities, and they're in a rivalry. But the Cubs are managed by the old school Leo Durocher. He says his pitchers have to go 9 innings. They play all day games. It's 103 degrees in the middle of the summer in Chicago, and he's pitching Ferguson Jenkins, Ken Holtzman, and Bill Hand every day, and they got to go 9, and they start to tire.
Yeah.
The Mets, on the other hand, have tried something new, which is a 5-day rotation, which gives Seaver and everybody else an extra day. And there's no other way to explain. There's really no way to explain Seaver and Koosman down the stretch other than they make it look so easy that they could throw their glove on the mound and 2 hours later walk away with a 2-hit shutout. That's how easy it looks.
Well, their depth on the mound is astronomical. I mean, I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, but they had some guy who turns out to be pretty good that was a rookie that year. and they want to throw him a little bit, give him some experience. You know what I mean? But their depth, their starting depth.
Nolan Ryan, it was
some guy named Nolan Ryan. Yeah, was a rookie with them in '69,
and he was a key cog on that team. He played a huge role in what happened both in the regular season and especially in both the playoffs and the World Series. Seaver, the Mets just come and come and come. They win 38 of their last 50. They pass the Cubs like a freight train and end up winning the Eastern Division Championship by about 8 games. They win 100 games. Seaver is 25-7, best pitcher in baseball, Cy Young Award winner, should have won the MVP award. Somehow some writers didn't give him the votes, and Willie McCovey wins it. They get to the playoffs. Seaver actually does not pitch well against the Atlanta Braves, but it's one of those seasons where everything just falls into place. It's just every move Gil Hodges makes works perfectly. Nothing fails. It's luck. It's God. I mean, in the movie Oh God, they asked George Burns, "What was your last miracle?" And he goes, "Well, let me see. There was the parting of the Red Sea and the '69 Mets." And it really looks that way. Seaver even says, if someone says, "Are the Mets, are they ordained by God?" And he goes, "No, but he does have an apartment in New York." He's joking about everything.
Right, sure.
He beats the Braves. They beat the Braves in the playoffs. The last game is won by Nolan Ryan, who pitches better than either Seaver or Kuzman in that 3-game playoff. Showing what he's capable of and showing a little glimpse of the future. They get to the World Series. Seaver pitches the opening game and loses. He hadn't lost since July. He loses, but his team picks him up, wins the next couple games, and Seaver goes up against the Orioles at Shea. The team up 2-1. He pitches a brilliant game. He's up 1-0 in the 9th, but the Orioles put a few guys on. Brooks Robinson, it's a liner, and a right fielder who wasn't even particularly good defensively and normally would have been taken out of the game for defensive purposes almost every time. And for this one day, Gil Hodges, for some reason, has not taken Ron Swoboda out. Swoboda makes a catch in right field that some say is the greatest catch in baseball history or World Series history, saves the day. The Mets score in the 10th. Seaver pitches a 10-inning complete game, 2-1 win. The Mets win the next day. They're the world champions.
Against a pretty amazing Baltimore
109 victory. Baltimore Orioles, considered the best team since the 27 Yankees. Frank Robinson, Brooks Robinson, Jim Palmer, Mike Cuellar, up and down.
Mark Belanger, Lee May was probably on one of those teams.
They had a great team.
Yeah, they did. And
the Mets just believed in themselves. And at this particular point, the admiration for Seaver is off the charts in terms of his intellect. They're calling him Kid Galahad, Sir Lancelot. They're saying it's Camelot. They're using these terms of hero worship for Seaver that you just don't use for athletes. Athletes are, they're the rough and tumble people. And Seaver is and he's this fresh-faced young Californian with this beautiful wife. Every time he pitches, the camera is all over his beautiful wife. And so they are just Mr. and Mrs. America. And it's as big as it gets. I have said, and I wrote a book about this, that the '69 Mets, and you can argue the 1980 Miracle on Ice, and there's a few others. In my opinion, it's the biggest story in the history of sports, the most improbable. Even the 1980 Miracle on Ice, the 1960 U.S. Olympic hockey team beat the Soviet Union in the Olympics 20 years earlier. And Herb Brooks had been on that team, had been cut just before they played it. So there was a little bit of a precedent. And, hockey had been played in the United States even before the Soviet Union. It had been played in Canada. The New York Mets were a last place team and a laughing stock and just the worst team in baseball, and that was just who they were. And now they are the best team in baseball, and Seaver is a hero. You can't even really imagine. I don't even know in today's game. I guess Tom Brady probably approached this level of hero worship, but that's what it takes to approach where Seaver was at that time. So, and beyond this, I've given a lot of detail and taken up a lot of time. Seaver goes from there. He's the best pitcher in baseball and has over the course of the next 16 years, I believe he's the greatest pitcher who ever lived. And I say that because they lowered the mound after the 68 season. He pitched on a mound that was 5 inches shorter than what Gibson did in 68 or McLean or Sandy Koufax in any of his years. His level of dominance, at least from 68 to 73, arguably 75, I think was at the same level as any pitcher ever. The game has changed a little bit. He should have won 30 games at least, really 2 or 3 times, but didn't because of the support of his team just wasn't going to allow him to do it. I mean, 1.76 ERA in 1976. He only wins 20. He only pitches, I think, 1 game that you would consider a bad game where you should have lost. If you've been with a good team that scored some runs, and he doesn't. Every loss was 1-0, 2-1. Takes his team to the series again at 73, wins 3 Cy Young awards, and he wins 311 career games. Here's what's really a little bit sad. Seaver has 300 entering the 1986 season. He has 305 wins and 100, and I think he had 197 or 198 losses. There's really no reason for him to continue playing. He's done everything there is to do in baseball. Boston Red Sox offer him a contract to play with them. He signs. He pitches okay for Boston, but unfortunately loses enough games to give him more than 200 career losses. Otherwise, he'd be the only pitcher in baseball history with more than 300 wins and less than 200 losses. 2.86 lifetime ERA, 3,000 plus career strikeouts at the time. He was second all time. There was a lot of jockeying on the all-time strikeout list because Ryan and Carlton were passing Seaver during this period. Seaver, I think he finishes 3rd all time. Several other pitchers have passed him since. He's probably 5th or 6th. Makes the Hall of Fame with the highest vote total in history of the Hall of Fame. And is really nothing more you could possibly do in your career. And like you say, beautiful marriage, retires. He's the Game of the Week announcer with Vince Scully. He announces Mets games. He announces Yankee games. He eventually moves back to his home state of California. Opens up a vineyard. It's one of the best vineyards in the Napa Valley. He's making beautiful wine. He's living the dream. But he comes down with Lyme disease from having lived near the ticks and the deer in Connecticut, where he lived in Greenwich, Connecticut for many years. And people think he has dementia. It's not dementia, it's Lyme disease, but it weakens him. He has some recovery, but then he comes down with dementia again, and then the Lyme disease and the dementia all kick together, and then COVID hits, and he comes down with COVID and passes away in 2020. I think he's 74 years old, far too young. Still had many more years left. and was a person who I just looked to as a young player, especially the fact that he wasn't great in high school because I struggled. I was not the star of my team in high school. I looked at Seaver and said, I'm going to be a late bloomer like Tom Seaver. In many ways I was, but nothing even close to what Seaver was. He was really like a miracle in terms of from age 17 to 19 or 20 to grow from 5'6" to 6 foot, from 140 to 205. And it's all muscle and it's weightlifting and all the things that he did. So that's Seaver's career in a nutshell. There's so much more to say, but those are the highlights.
No kidding. I mean, you mentioned right there a few moments ago about, he would have been the only player to have more than 300 wins and less than 200 losses. I personally couldn't remember anything about his Boston Red Sox days. I knew Cincinnati. He went back to the Mets. That was kind of an interesting portion of his career. Then with the White Sox for a while, I remember that. And that was right after, in my opinion, the White Sox tried to figure out what doggone uniforms they were going to wear.
Yeah.
The circus of Bill Veck's inability to find a consistent uniform. But Cincinnati, for me, Steven, was when this guy was he was a workhorse. He was the face of the franchise, who had not been the face of the franchise. It was Pete, it was Concepcion, Joe Morgan, Griffey. You throw Tony Perez in there, George Foster, Johnny Bench. Any of those guys would be the face of the franchise. Well, all of them as they got a little bit older, and then Pete leaves in 1980. Who is it? It's going to be Tom.
Yes.
And you'd always see him, and his right knee would always have it be dirty, and he'd have to wear a knee pad to keep it from scraping on the dirt. And, there were just so many iconic things about Tom and his ability. And yeah, he failed a few times. He had 200 losses. There were people that could hit him, but on a consistent basis, even when they hit him, they go, that dude made me work for that single, or we had to fight like crazy to get 2 runs in an inning against Tom Seaver.
He pitched to some of the greatest catchers in baseball history. Jerry Grody was an excellent catcher. Then he pitches to Johnny Bench, and then he pitches to Carlton Fisk. Thing about Seaver, as I mentioned, he'd learned how to pitch when he was a kid without the benefit of the fastball. He had to cultivate his talent. He gets the best. He was considered the hardest throwing pitcher in the National League, certainly after Ryan goes to the American League. And so from around 1968 to 75, he's considered the hardest throwing pitcher, really more like 77, 78 when he gets to the Reds. It's about a 10-year period of complete dominance and basing it on being a fastball pitcher with a great slider, great control, and smarts, and with the best mechanics in baseball. He eventually, his fastball tails a little bit as he gets older, but he continues to have great success simply because of his work ethic and because he was so smart. He knew how to outwit batters. And, he would often talk about being in the bullpen, and the pitching coach would say, you don't have your best stuff today, Tony. He says, it doesn't matter. I'm going to beat him anyway, because I know how to pitch. I know how to beat him, and he would. This was with the Reds, the Mets, and the White Sox.
And that is a critical component.
Yeah. Well, that's why he wins 311 games instead of having to retire with 250 career wins.
Well, yes, I completely agree. I'm just looking at it from a different angle. If you can go out on the hill knowing your best stuff isn't with you that day, but you still have my backup move, which I use for football, any defensive end, if I'm going to bull rush all day, they're going to figure out that you bull rush, and you better have another move. If you as a pitcher have something else, even if it's not your best stuff, that you can rely on. Most guys, that's all they've got. That's it. I can just throw this, and this is what it did. But Tom had multiple ways of being able to get you to ground out. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. In fact, he even relished maybe going out to the mound without his best stuff, because he knew he could still win. He loved doing it. He loved the chessboard of pitching, the strategy of pitching. Well, okay, I don't have 100-mile-an-hour fastball today. I've got to have to get by with a 92 to 93-mile-an-hour fastball. But I've still got my slider, and I know how to hit the corners. And my catcher is a great catcher, whether it's Fisk or Bench. He knows how to work with me. And we've talked about Seaver the jokester. Here's a great one. He's pitching to Johnny Bench with the Reds. It's the first inning, and the bases are loaded and nobody's out. And Bench comes out to the mound. And, Johnny Bench is not going to say to Tom Seaver, this is what you need to do, or you're not doing this. He knows that Tom Seaver is smart enough to know what he's doing wrong and can figure it out in his own mind. He just wants to relax him. And he said, check out the blonde behind the plate. And Seaver goes, what do you think I'm in this trouble for in the first place? So they're out, so the batter is the fourth place hitter. It's like Keith Hernandez or someone. He's looking out and he's seeing Seaver and Bench laughing. He's going, what do these guys know I don't know. Yeah. Seaver works his way out of the inning and wins the game. He knew what he could do. He knew his body. But I'd like to talk a little bit about my books, if it's okay, Harper.
Well, if anyone wants to know a little bit more of Tom Seaver and what we've been talking about and some additional things that we haven't talked about, where would they go to find any of that information?
Well, it's a deep dive. And it was a big part of my career. I'd always wanted to write about Seaver. And in 2007 was really a key element for my career. That was a year that One Night, Two Teams came out. And Hollywood was looking to option that book, and it was selling well. And I got a call from a guy in New York named Peter Miller. He made himself out. Really had a big ego. I'm a high-powered agent. You're really lucky I'm on the phone with you. And okay, great. I want to represent you. Okay. Well, what are we going to do here? And he goes, well, what do you want to write next? I go, well, I want to do a book about the 1969 Mets. You ought to be able to sell that. You're in New York, the publishing industry. So he becomes my agent, and he sells me to Globe Pequot Press to write a book about the 1969 New York Mets, which, as I say, was, in my opinion, the greatest all-around story and the greatest underdog story in the history of sports. And it was a wonderful book, and it did well. And of course, it was a deep dive on Tom Seaver, his entire life, how he grew up, his marriage to Nancy, his relationship with Gil Hodges, and that whole 1969 season where they started in spring training. They actually got off to a slow start. They win 11 games in June. They have this spurt in July. Seaver throws this imperfect game, as he calls it, in the chapter I call the incarnation of a true New York icon. I called it, because I said this was his moment where he's no longer just a really good pitcher. He's now a New York sports icon, which is different from being really big in any other city, as big as Joe Montana is in San Francisco, or Michael Jordan or Tom Brady. The New York sports scene is such. And Seaver has won over the New York sports fans. And this is not easy to do because they are a fickle bunch, but they fall for him, and they never lost their enthusiasm. Never got booed, ever, in New York. Not when he came back. So they have this magnificent season. They beat the Orioles.
Stop for a second there, Steven. That is a very difficult thing to do.
Yes.
To earn the respect, and the New York sports fans are pretty savvy, right? If you played for Philadelphia, he get booed regardless, because that's just what you do when you're in Philadelphia. That's almost a badge of honor to get booed by the locals. But for of as fickle as a New York fan is to not boo. Did they boo Willie Mays? I think when he would strike out near the end of his career, he got a few boos, but that's an important characteristic.
I think I mean, now you're talking about that level of greatness that Willie Mays wasn't booed, but he's Willie Mays. So that's the idea. Tom Seaver's at the same level of greatness.
Yeah.
As a pitcher as Willie Mays is as a center fielder. It's as good as it gets in sports. Like I mentioned, Michael Jordan, Joe Montana, Tom Brady, Wayne Gretzky. These are the icons of sports, and Tom Seaver is absolutely. And there are other great pitchers of his era: Sam McDowell, Bob Gibson, Denny McLain, Juan Marichal, Jim Palmer, Steve Carlton. In my opinion, Seaver was better than any of them. And, he even mentored Roger Clemens in Boston. And, you can argue Clemens, Greg Maddux, Randy Johnson, Clayton Kershaw, who's the greatest pitcher of their eras. I could make the argument, and I do at the end of my next book, which is The Last Icon. I do a full deep dive into why I say Seaver was the best who ever lived. So this is the next book. This is 2011. At this point, I want to really I want to interview Seaver. And
before you do, it's interesting that you said something, because we talked a little bit earlier about the contractual, the money hungry people that were criticizing him and all this. Is it fair to say that there might have been a conversation between Roger Clemens and Tom Seaver? Because I think Clemens, near the end of his career, tried to copy or mimic what Seaver was doing. I'm the best pitcher on the planet. When I go on the mound, you're going to win, and you have to pay me accordingly. And he went with shorter deals, Clemens did. Toronto, he signed a 2-year deal with them. Then he signed another 2-year deal, goes to the to the Yankees, and then gets another short-term contract so he could keep renewing it, hoping that other guy. He brought the level of pay to the pitcher to new heights it had never been before. Where Seaver tried to do that and got ridiculed, Clemens mastered it in a way that everybody was able to benefit from it. Is there any truth to that aspect of Seaver's contractual savvy transferring down into what Clemens was able to do with his financial advantage that he was able to take into the
Well, what I can say is that everywhere Seaver went, young pitchers worshipped him.
Yeah.
Tom Hume of the Reds being one, and Clemens being another. So Tom Seaver was the kind of guy who was going to give advice to a guy like Roger Clemens. He was going to see in Clemens, he's like me. He had the same kind of body as Roger Clemens, same kind of drop and drive motion. He was the same kind of power pitcher. They'd both come out of top college programs, Texas for Clemens, USC for Seaver. So they had a lot in common. And I'm sure, did Tom Seaver, thrust himself upon Clemens? I don't think he had to. I think Roger Clemens was from day one going to say, Tom, help me, tell me what I need to know. The one thing Seaver's going to say to a guy like Roger Clemens, and this, he might not necessarily be giving him, advice like he is his agent, but he's going to say, you're the best. Take the mound knowing that you're the best. You are, nobody's better, and assume dominance and be the best because you really are. Believe in yourself. And that's certainly the season that Clemens had in '86 when they were teammates. But getting to, The Last Icon, and at this point, I want to interview him. So I know Bill Lee, who was his teammate at USC. This is 2011. And by the way, I'd written the book for the Miracle Mets, a 2009 book, did well, got some good praise. So I want to come back 2 years later. And I'm also writing for Rowman and Littlefield. I'm doing a lot of books. Most of my SC football books were with Taylor Trade, which was an imprint of Rowman and Littlefield. guy named Rick Reinhardt, played a huge role in my career, saved my career, frankly. They actually later bought Globe Pequot, who had done my the 1969 Miracle Mets book. And it was funny because almost every book that I ever wrote for Rick, I would come up with an idea, or Rick would come up with the idea, but I would come up with an idea and I would say, what do you think? He said, I got to take it to the board. He would say, whatever board. I don't know how much anybody else made decisions. It was his company and he ran the show, but usually that would take a couple months. The Seaver book was, I never forget, I was with Bill Lee, and I think he was in the car with me, and I called him on his cell phone, and I'm just driving down the highway, and hey, what do you think about a Tom Seaver book? And he's like, yes, on the spot. Yes, let's do it. So I say to Bill, okay, you got to get me up there to Calistoga where Tom has this winery. Can you do it? Yes, I can. And shortly thereafter, he comes back and he says, I got bad news. He says Seaver has dementia, because that's what everyone thought at the time. It was Lyme disease, but Lyme disease looks like dementia. It has very similar, especially its traits early on. So unfortunately, this is a 2011 book that I wrote. I didn't get to interview Seaver for this book. I interviewed a lot of his teammates at USC and in professional ball, in Bud Harrelson and Spaceman Lee. Spoke a lot with Seaver's agent. He was a lawyer in New York, old school guy. Book comes out in 2011, and you know, it was what I think really was great about this book was the chapter and the USC years, because I captured Seaver's USC career better than anybody. I just flat did. A lot of people have written about Tom Seaver, Roger Angel, a lot of the New York writers, but I had access to a lot of his SC stuff, and I captured the whole vibe. You have to understand, Seaver at USC, he enters in 1964. He's there with George Lucas and John Milius and the rise of the USC Film School. And he's there with a lot of Olympians and swimmers and the great football teams. And it was truly a golden age at the University of Southern California as an athletic department, as a football team, as a baseball team, and as a producer of great athletes, including Olympians, and producing famed people in Hollywood who are coming out of their film school. It was a period of time that was just a magic thing that was happening on that campus. And I really captured that because I have a knack for that. It's my school. I knew who these people were. I knew the vibe. And that's where a lot of people loved that book, especially it's really seen as an SC book. It's been sold at the USC campus, and a lot of Trojans baseball players have read this book and have loved this book. And, it's very nostalgic. And it's interesting, Seaver had signed with the Braves, and then, of course, had to sign with the Mets when the Braves contract was invalidated. That man, he went to USC. He lived in Manhattan Beach with Nancy and went to school in the off season of 66, 67, and 68, slowly but surely getting towards his degree. Then in 69, he was such a big deal after winning the series. He did not go to school that off season because he was making a lot of money on as a celebrity and doing advertising and that type of thing. After the 1970 season, which was a disappointing season for the team, he also did not go to school. He takes a road trip across the country with his wife, going to Cooperstown and going to, Mount Rushmore and seeing America and really reviving his love of baseball and trying to understand what had gone wrong, why the team that had been so good in 1970 was not so good, or in 1969 was not so good in 1970, comes back the next year. Maybe the best season he ever had was 1971. Team doesn't win. He doesn't get the support. He wins 20 instead of 25. He's as good in 1970, 71, 72, 73 as he was in 69. And he's also going to school every offseason. He gets his degree, which I was really impressed that he managed to get his degree, because so many athletes don't. And it took going to school for the better part of 8 years, really, every offseason to finally do it. And it was funny, his final class was like a geology course, and he arranged to do it through correspondence. And what he did was he studied the dirt of every infield in the National League. He talked to and he took it very seriously and wrote up a really professional paper. And it talked to every groundskeeper at every stadium, the difference between the dirt, Dodger Stadium or Philadelphia or what have you. Turned it in, got, of course, straight A. Seaver was a very intellectual guy, and some people thought it was an act. Early on, Seaver was in a plane, and the writers in New York were jealous of him. And here's this California guy, and these New York writers thought of themselves as New York intellectuals. We're the smartest guys in the room. They were not smarter than Tom Seaver. So one of them saw Seaver sitting in the plane reading The Agony and the Ecstasy, which was this great book later made into a movie with Charlton Heston as Michelangelo. Fabulous story. We talked about Seaver loving art and music, and he cared about these things. And some people were like, oh, it's an act. He's sitting in the plane, wants us to see his reading The Agony. Well, no, it wasn't true at all. He read these books, read Catch-22. He read, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. He read, Helter Skelter. He didn't just read comic books like Yogi Berra. He went to museums with his wife. But boy, I tell you, once the season started and it was baseball, and he was the hardest worker. One year, the team was, there was something of a strike. Seaver organized a spring training for the Mets on his own and took over and had everybody, he had doing the wind sprints, how many pitches they're throwing, what they're working on, keeping charts, just like he was the pitching coach. So when they finally got to spring training, he gives it all to Rube Walker, the pitching coach. He's going, man, this is you've done a better job preparing these guys than I do. Could easily have been a manager, but he didn't go in that direction. He went in the direction first of broadcasting, and then later, he's from Fresno, so his father was the vice president of a raisin company. So he understood the land, and he said, I'm returning to my roots in California. I'm going to be in the land. And he grows grapes and turns those grapes into wine. And I've had his wine, and it's really good. I went to Seaver's house in Greenwich, Connecticut in 1981. He had a 100-year-old farmhouse. And I went to his winery in 2016. Met Nancy, his wife. Tom was just under the weather. The Lyme disease and the dementia was kicking in, and I wasn't able to see him. It was very sad. I went there with my friend Mike McDowd. But at least I saw the place. I wish I could have known him like Bill Lee knew him and others. I know people that don't like him. I know people who say he was arrogant, but the people who knew him, and the article, or the last week we had Pat Jordan on, and Pat Jordan, just like I said, Jim Murray and others, and Pat Jordan, was a hard-boiled guy and a former pitcher himself, he doesn't impress easily. And he said, I couldn't help myself. I admired Seaver more than anybody I ever interviewed. That's what Pat Jordan said last week on this show. And he was an icon. He really was. And, one of the joys about this show, Harper, and thank you, Vincent Turner, God bless you, is I've had the chance to talk about people who make such a difference in my life. And I've had some on, some have been guests, some I've just only been able to talk about. Fortunately, I can only talk about Seaver, but he's at the top of the list. He's up there with my dad, people who influenced me. He was something else.
Well, on April 13th, 1967, Major League Baseball welcomed a young, fresh-faced George Thomas Seaver into the ranks. And 20 years later, he earned 311 victories, 2.86 earned run average. He had struck out 3,640 batters. He played for the New York Mets, the Cincinnati Reds, the Chicago White Sox, the Boston Red Sox during that 20-year period. He was a 12-time All-Star. He was a World Series champion in 1969. He won the Cy Young Award 3 times. He was a strikeout.
Should have won that 5 times, by the way.
I know. I'm just saying this is going to be a what else can you do for me, right? He was the ERA leader in the National League for 3 separate seasons. 5 years he was the strikeout leader. He pitched a no-hitter on June 16th, 1978. He's in the New York Baseball Hall of Fame. He's in the Cincinnati Reds Baseball Hall of Fame. He's in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. His number's been retired. And by the way, you're wearing one of his jerseys. I prefer the button-down pinstripe, but they went to a different jersey, and they're still making, as I said, most of the pictures that I see of Tom have him in the button-down jersey. I would love to have a road gray button-down Mets jersey with his number and name on the back. You have the white home jersey, of course, and there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's just a part of the folklore and the history of the game that so many people take seriously. And I appreciate you taking Tom Seaver seriously and devoting a full show here for the 97 minutes we've been talking about one guy and one guy only.
Well, he's also in the USC Sports Hall of Fame. And let me tell you, Harper, that is a hard Hall of Fame to get into. There are some people who are not in that. You'd be amazed at the names of some of the people who are not in that. He's also has a statue of him outside Citi Field in New York.
Yeah.
They don't just give statues to just any old athlete in New York City. And he's also in the Marine Corps Hall of Fame. I always loved that about him, that he served in the Marine Corps. And it was I don't know if propitious is the right word. It was a really smart move in that he got his military duty out of the way before the Vietnam War. He was in the Corps, and he served in the reserves for a number of years. But I think by the time the war really heated up, he had done his 4 years. Although the reserves did not get called up during the Vietnam War. So most athletes were in the reserves or the National Guard. In Iraq in the early 2000s, they went to the reserves, and there was a lot of controversy. But Seaver was a great American. He always talked about the Marine Corps and what it did for him in terms of discipline, what it did for his body and his mental discipline. And he loved the fact that his manager Gil Hodges had been in the Marine Corps. Yogi Berra was his manager. Yogi Berra was at D-Day. I mean, storming the beaches of Normandy and Sword Beach. And the fact that M. Donald Grant is saying about Tom Seaver, you're a communist because you want to renegotiate your contract and you're in the Greenwich Country Club. And we didn't really, his father played such a role. His father was Charles Seaver. He won the Walker Cup. He also competed at the U.S. Open. He was one of the best golfers in the United States in the 30s. So he had great athletic ability. His mother was a good golfer and a good athlete. His older brother, was a sculptor. And like I said, Seaver loved art. And his brother was living in New York when Seaver broke in with the Mets in 1967. And the older brother was displaying some of his sculpting, I think, at his apartment. And I think he was visiting somebody showing his sculpting work. And the guy had a poster of his younger brother, Tom, on his wall. And he goes, "Hey, that's my brother." The guy goes, "He's the best young pitcher in baseball." He didn't even realize yet how good his brother was. And Tom always talked about how he admired his brother's sculpting. He said, "It's just like pitching. Pitching is art. And that's my version of sculpting." And later, Pat Jordan would talk about how he would build a wine cellar at his home in Greenwich. And he said each bottle of wine was a victory. And every row of 20 bottles was a 20-game season. And all these rows together, 20 rows, made up a career of 20-win seasons, adding up to 300 career wins. This, he said, in 73, he admitted to Jordan, he says, "I want to be considered someday to be the greatest pitcher in baseball history." He didn't say it like Muhammad Ali, "I'm the greatest of all times." He said it because he believed he was capable of doing it. And so those were his goals. It's like we were on a few weeks back, and when I said to Barry Bonds, "Hey, Barry, you're going to break the all-time home run record." And Barry says, "Yeah, I know." So what this is confidence. Hey, when you're that good, you're going to believe that you can be the very best, and you're going to squeeze every ounce out of your career as you possibly can. And when you consider he played on the best high school program, and then he played at USC in their heyday, played for Dado, and he got such great coaches, and he knew Casey Stengel, everybody. Greenwich, Connecticut, and New York at that time, he knew people who had been in baseball since the turn of the century almost. He just knew so many famous people. He had such a rich life in the game.
And it's a great life that we get a chance to visit with and recollect and give some commentary on, and certainly an example that he set. Final thoughts, Steven, before we go. I mean, he's had an impressionable guy on you for obvious reasons, but why would he be for others?
Well, for me, the intelligence is what was the number one thing. I loved Christy Mathewson. He was compared with Christy Mathewson. There were novels written called Baseball Joe. Baseball Joe was based on Christy Mathewson, and Baseball Joe was a really smart guy who'd gone to college, and Christy Mathewson had. And he was compared with Mathewson, who was seen as a flawless character. Mathewson was seen as a guy who had changed the dynamic of baseball because he had a beautiful wife, and he was a good Christian man and college educated. And he made it so good people, not just gamblers and women of ill repute, but decent citizens can now go to the ballpark and feel like I can be a fan. And that was Christy Mathewson's role in baseball. And so when they compared Seaver to Mathewson, I thought that was really a wonderful comparison. And Seaver was a baseball historian. He read the glory of their times, and he read all these great books and knew who Mathewson was, Grover Alexander, Walter Johnson, and said, I'm going to try to be like those guys. I'm going to try to beat those records. And a lot of those records he did break.
Yeah, model citizen in so many ways. And we hope that you all learned at least a little bit more about some of the intricacies that were a part of Tom Seaver in his life. Obviously, he left us too soon, but we do want to pass along, some of the great things that he was able to accomplish on a baseball diamond and off of it. So we hope you learned something from that. We want to say thank you for everybody tuning in here today. This has been Take 5 with Steven Travers. And Steven obviously has written 2 books that include Tom Seaver. So his insight and his background on this is absolutely imperative. And we hope it's been a nice visit down memory lane for you as well. So for Steven Travers, our producer and engineer, Logan Landers, I'm Harper LeBel saying thank you for tuning in to another episode of Take 5 with Steven Travers. We hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.